Shogun episode 10 is out and the show's over. Feeling a bit sad now because I look forward to it every week. The finale for me was well written, but not really what I wanted. And maybe that's just because of how media usually goes. But I was looking forward to the big battle and the big fight and the action and the payoffs. And we got all the payoffs, and they said what the conclusion was. And it made sense for the show. I just wanted the big epic climax, I guess. I'll go ahead and blame their advertising on that. The advertising made it sound like the show was building toward a giant war the whole time. And I guess technically it was. We just didn't see it. I did hear that was how it happened in the book. I wish they would have used the adaptation word loosely there and shown it, or some of it. But let's go ahead and just get into the episode. So we start off with John. I thought this was a flash forward, and they kind of ruined the ending there. But you find out as the episode goes on that it's just a dream that isn't going to happen anymore. So in his dream, he escaped Japan. He's back dying comfortably in his bed with grandkids, presumably with Mariko, or she was with them at least. And obviously we'll see that by the end of this episode, all of that's gone. So back to reality, Mariko's dead. He says some prayers for her, and the ninjas have done their attack and run away. So the finale is called Chapter 10, A Dream of a Dream. And obviously one interpretation of this is that John was literally dreaming about a metaphorical dream of his future, which, like I said, is all gone by the end of the episode. I'm really curious to see what people think of Toranaga now that we have all the context. Because I feel like it was pretty obvious that this is where it was heading, but I feel like the way that he got there, I wonder if people would consider him more of like an anti-hero type. So we get a quick little scene at the beginning of Toranaga looking at one of his birds, and he lets it go later in the episode. I'm assuming that's supposed to parallel Mariko, since he kept her close and she was alive, obviously, even though she didn't want to be all this time, and now she's finally dead. But maybe I'm looking too much into it. Maybe it's just a bird. We start off with the regents. They got a letter from Toranaga saying that he's protesting because of Mariko's death, and Ishido says it doesn't matter. We'll fight them, and with the heir's army, he doesn't have a chance. And he's saying, let's go now, and the Christian regents protest, and Lady Oichiba says, no, Mariko's going to get a proper service. So the battle won't be for about a month, roughly. And this is a pretty important delay that she does here, because you're going to find out in just a minute that she sent a secret letter to Toranaga saying that Ishido is not going to have the heir's support. And this seems to be because she just views him as kind of an idiot. Like, he's having to take hostages, he had to send the ninjas in, she blames him for killing Mariko, so she betrays him. And they get an earthquake here, which they start to think is a bad omen, which is kind of amusing. The Christian regents are still concerned about John, calling him a heretic. And Ishido says, once the war is declared, I don't give a shit. And we also saw all of Toranaga's women leaving, and that's kind of the impetus that he wanted for the other regents to not be able to be used as hostages. And then we get this scene between Yabushige and Ishido, where Yabushige is seemingly pretending to be crazy, and he's kind of guilt-ridden because he said that he thought Mariko would only get taken, not killed. And then he starts jumping in this little pond trying to grab catfish and just sort of acting unstable. And he talks about how the Taiko was going to fight Toranaga, but then because of this bad luck with the catfish, he had to settle for peace. So this whole scene is interesting because it seems like he's guilt-ridden and also kind of trying to warn Ishido, but also kind of like, screw that guy, because he killed Mariko, or got her killed at least. So Ishido, assuming that he's just being a little bit loopy, but is on his side, says return to Izu and get his army ready. Because as far as they know, Toranaga has fled Edo, but he's in hiding. And this is where Toranaga lets his bird go, and he says, bear many daughters. So you could take that as regret over his son, Mariko. Either one, I think it works. So we see a little bit more of John's dream. He has some flashbacks with Mariko, and then he wakes up and realizes that she's already been buried, and it's been a few days. He's just been out. So the Portuguese guy is escorting John to be taken to the harbor with Lord Kiama's men, who wants him dead. And John's like, is this where I'm going to be killed? And the Portuguese guy essentially explains, you were supposed to, but something happened, so you're not gonna. And we find out in just a minute here that he promised Mariko to take care of him, or at least let him get out of Osaka alive. And he also finds out at this point that all the other families have been released, so now Ishido has lost all of his leverage, which is what Toranaga wanted with the whole Mariko thing last episode. And we get a nice little scene here where he realizes kind of that he actually made it to the harbor, and it seems like he's still going to live again when he probably shouldn't have. And he's trying to hold back tears, but he's still crying a little bit. The actor does a really good job with this one, because it's just nice that it's not super over the top. It's very restrained. I think it hits pretty well emotionally. We get a little scene here with Lady Oichiba in the air, and they're doing the poetry together that Mariko started, and she refers to her as a friend, which obviously is a pretty important line considering that she betrays Ishido later in this episode. And we get a little callback here where she quotes Mariko and says that flowers are flowers because they die. Essentially appreciating things that are beautiful because they're temporary. Everything dies, that sort of idea. And I guess if you want to go deeper, maybe the idea of would they still be beautiful if they were permanent or never ending or whatever. And obviously the parallels to human life and all that. Yabushige is on the boat with John, and he's kind of having a freak out, presumably because he knows that he's going to die if he goes back to Izu. And he asks John to take him back to England with him, which is pretty in character for Yabushige. He's been literally just trying to survive the entire season, so it makes sense to me that he'd be acting like this. They get back, and John's like, maybe I'll finally get my boat and I can leave the Japans. But his boat's been sunk. And he thinks that Mariko traded the Portuguese how to sink the boat, or she prepared it for them in exchange for John's life. And we find out that later on, Toranaga is the one who wanted it sunk. Once they get to land, Yabushige gets his swords taken, and he's arrested. And John realizes that Toranaga is punishing the villagers, trying to figure out who the traitor is. Which is a lot more messed up when you realize that Toranaga is the one that did it to begin with, and he's just running shit ruthlessly how he does. So we find out that Toranaga found out about Yabushige's betrayal pretty much immediately, and that Yabushige wasn't actually supposed to wake the other people up. The ninjas were supposed to sneak in, kill who they had to, and then kidnap Mariko, or at least take her hostage. But he felt guilty, so he woke everyone up so they could fight back, which is what ended up getting her killed. When Yabushige finds out about his punishment to commit seppuku by tomorrow at sunset, he's like, give me a good death, like being torn apart by cannons or eaten alive by fish, or I even take being eaten by dogs, which is another callback because early in the show, I think it was the first episode, he says that being eaten by dogs is one of the worst deaths. And Toranaga says no, and then he says, who do you want to be your second? And he requests John, and Toranaga says no again, and then he requests Toranaga, who accepts. We get a nice little scene here with John and Fuji, and his Japanese is much better now. He makes kind of a sad comment about how there's no translator for him, but they can communicate well enough between just the two of them. And he finds out that she's going to be a nun, and that her service to Toranaga is done. Toranaga thanks his concubine for his new son, and he's like, at least I had other ones to replace Nagakado, which is pretty dark, but I guess that's probably how it was back then, since mortality was so high. And this is where he gets the letter from Lady Oichiba, and this thing is like a damn receipt. He keeps folding it until it's like all the way across the screen. But anyway, what you find out is that she pretty much views Ishido as incompetent and says that the heir's army will not fight with him, so the battle is his when the time comes. And he says a poem, and his wife's like, there's no way that you wrote that, and it was Mariko's last words. Here's where we find out that Fuji still has her ashes for her husband and kid, even though she's supposed to do something with them. And she tells John that she's going to be a nun. And he tries to order her to stay because she's his consort, and she just says no. And to me, this just seems like John is kind of at peak loneliness now that Mariko's gone. And he didn't really have any friends to begin with. If you want to count Yabushige, he's gone also, or he's about to be gone. So now John really has no one, not even his hope of escaping or getting home. And he goes out to the garden and kind of meditates. And I guess this is sort of his accepting that he's either stuck here or needs to die. He goes to talk to Toranaga, and Omi takes his gun and sword. And I'm pretty sure this is another callback too, because last time he refused, and this time he just gives him over. And the spy, who is pretending to be like a religious fisherman, is told by Toranaga to reveal to John who he actually is, and he's a samurai. And he was placed there a long time ago to operate that way and be a spy, like well in advance, because Toranaga is always planning ahead. And he was also pretending to be religious to work with the Portuguese. And John has a good line here where he says, at least you're not Catholic. So John apologizes to Toranaga for freaking out earlier in the season. He says that he lost hope. And he's like, but because I lost hope, you shouldn't punish the whole village. And Toranaga's like, what does he care? And John explains that he has no more interest in his enemies. He doesn't need that anymore. And that they're not the ones who burned the ship. And then he tries to tell Toranaga that he's actually his enemy. Toranaga essentially says that he's using this as an excuse to get rid of people who he views as disloyal. Because John is pleading, like, just stop killing people, there's no reason to. And after Toranaga says, tough titties, John's like, fine, I'm protesting this by killing myself. And John says that since he got there, he was trying to use Japan to fight his enemies so that he's actually an enemy and to stop killing his villagers. He says, I fed you shit, and gestured it, which would be funnier in a different context. So John tries to kill himself as protest, but Toranaga stops him and punches him in the face. And again, Toranaga just keeps treating him like pretty much a child, like he has all season. He's like, if you're done throwing a tantrum, fix your ship, build me a fleet. Because he's trying to use Western weapons to establish dominance as Shogun for the long term and reign over a peaceful Japan. Yabushige asked when he was arrested for Omi to be made his heir and him be given the village. And Toranaga said, not a bad choice, but it's not yours to give. So Omi's just thanking him for making him his heir. And Yabushige is like, find a good husband for my wife, make sure he's not an idiot. Here's where Toranaga explains that he negotiated with the church in exchange for John's life through Mariko. And he says it was a ruse to test John. And it seems like he would rather have John than the one ship because John can build him a whole fleet. And then he kind of says, maybe I'll tell him one day, once that ship's being rebuilt, but I'll have to destroy it again. And pretty much that he can never let him leave Japan. And Yabushige asks what it's like to essentially control everything. He says control the wind. And Toranaga says that he doesn't, he just studies it. So he's just really good at predicting shit, which obviously we've seen all season. Yabushige is kind of sulking that he's not going to get to see whatever plans Toranaga had. And Toranaga's like, Crimson Sky's already done. Essentially all the cards have been played, and now it's just a matter of going through with it. And he explains that in a month, at the Battle of Sekigahara, there'll be 5 armies, but the heir's army won't be there. And Ishida will be cut down before he even has a chance to fight back. And this will make it Toranaga's victory. It's already a given. And Toranaga recounts how everyone made this happen to where he could set up his center of power in Edo and create a peaceful Japan. And he says even the barbarian played a part, but not because he was important. He said, I thought about trading his life many times, but mainly I thought he was funny, and my enemies needed to be distracted. So pretty much he just liked John for whatever reason, and because he liked John, everyone else viewed him as some sort of key part, even though he never really was. Which I think if you watch the show again, that probably makes a lot more sense. Because for me, a lot of the season, I was like, when is John going to do something? Like, is he going to use his ship and attack Osaka? Like, what's going on? But when you find out he's a distraction, it makes a lot more sense why he didn't really do much all season as far as Toranaga's plans. And Toranaga reflects back on what John said when they first met, because Toranaga told him his war was pointless, and John said, unless I win. And then he kind of talks about how if you win, anything is possible, because essentially you're still alive to keep trying things. And Yabushige finally figures out that Toranaga wants to be Shogun. And he's like, you're not any better than us in your secret heart. And he wants to hear him say it out loud, but Toranaga still won't do it even now, when he's about to behead Yabushige anyway. And then he says, why tell a dead man the future? Which is another callback. Yabushige said that earlier in the season as well. And then this is kind of Yabushige's final moment before he does what he needs to here. And then John and Fuji go out to the middle of the water. She dumps her husband and son's ashes in, and John dumps Mariko's in. And Fuji says, let your hands be the last to hold her, which is another callback to what Mariko said about Fuji and her son in the first episode, right before the son got killed, obviously. And I don't know if this is true, but I read online that this place where they're dumping the ashes is where the author of this book's ashes were actually spread. No clue if it's true, didn't verify it, but it's interesting if it is. And if it's not, then I just wasted like 15 seconds of your time with internet bullshit. So sorry. We see John and a bunch of the villagers trying to pull his boat out of the water. And then eventually Buntaro and a few of the other guys come over to help. And there's like a weird mutual respect between Buntaro and John. I guess because they both love Mariko. But they eventually do get the boat out, and John's going to make his new life here. And we end with Toranaga kind of looking out to sea, presumably on his way to become Shogun finally, after decades of planning and scheming and surviving. So yeah, this is a really great show. I think I'd probably enjoy it more if I watched it again. One, because there's a lot of characters, and the names are a lot easier the second time through. But also, because the marketing made it seem like this was going to be a big war show, when really it's like a political drama with some action. Yeah, I don't have too much to say about it. It was a really good season. It'll probably be the best season of TV this year. The series is done. I think this was probably better than The Gentleman, but I think I like The Gentleman more just because it was a lot more fun. Shogun was really good, but not super happy except for some dry humor, mainly from Yabushige and John. It seems like the book adaptation people are generally happy. As a show, it's killing it in minutes watched and stuff. I noticed it when I was doing my Halo ratings videos, and overall it was just really good. All the characters were super interesting. They were smart. The politics were smart. Everybody made sense in their actions. We didn't get really cheesy and corny dialogue. Yeah, just really well done. And I guess if the first version is anything to base off of, we won't get another version for about 40 more years. So this will be it for everybody who's a fan. I'm not going to keep going though. If you've watched my videos this season, thanks. And if you're here, let me know what you thought. I try to respond to all the comments, like and subscribe and all that. Thanks. See ya.